My name is Ryszard Łuczyn. I am a political affairs analyst at Polityka Insight. And for the next discussion, who and what and for what purpose is winning the global disinformation war, I'm going to talk to Anneli Ahonen, head of East Stratcom Taskforce of the European External Action Service. Welcome. Hello. Hi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you here today.
And again, before we start our discussion, I'm going to encourage the viewers to ask questions as early as possible so that we can ask them at the end of our discussion. Now, 2 weeks ago, East Stratcom Task Force celebrated publishing its 200th weekly disinformation review. This is a document in which you look at many examples of Russian disinformation against the European Union. And the fact that we have to counter Russian disinformation is nothing new. But the European Union has been quite vocal lately about naming China as the other main source of disinformation. So I wanted to ask you what has changed, or what really has changed recently, or have we just been slow to respond to what has changed earlier?
Thank you very much. And yes, truly, it's a celebration of our 200th disinformation review, which is a nice moment from our point of view. There is already quite a long track record and history for the European Union to address Russia's disinformation and pro-Kremlin disinformation, as you mentioned, where this work started in 2015 with the well-known background of much more clear understanding how the war in Ukraine, illegal annexation of Crimea, and shooting down MH17 were all used, or disinformation was widely used to gain some political goals by Russia. And from then on, the issue of disinformation and the challenge and also understanding of it in the European Union level has become much more wider. So there are different work strands with the European Commission, who work with the social media companies to track how they are tackling disinformation, how they are promoting authoritative content, and so on through the code of practice. What really changed with the COVID-19, when Europe and all countries globally faced a totally new crisis, is how disinformation can really have a direct impact on people's lives. And from there, there is a growing understanding that of the urgency of the issue, that something needs to be done very soon. As if we can already see, there are some studies that indicate that, for example, if a person believes and claims that the COVID-19 is an artificially man-made virus or originates in a US military lab, all frequent claims by Russia's disinformation, then this person is also less likely to follow any health advice, to wash your hands, to keep the social distancing, and so on. So I think that this urgency came from clear understanding of the health impacts of COVID-19 disinformation. And clearly, China has been a player in the disinformation field. Of course, earlier its tactics and strategies have differed from the ones that Russia has been using, especially when it comes to Europe. But during the coronavirus crisis, what we have clearly seen is that there is a clear overlap of Russia's and Chinese interests and the ways how they are using disinformation. So, for example, both like outlets or channels from both countries use very similar messages about like misleading the people to believe that the virus actually originates in the U.S. Biological weapon laboratory.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the fact that with the epidemic, the impact of the disinformation has changed in very much. But do you believe that apart from that, have we seen a qualitative change of how disinformation is spread, or is it just a quantitative change? Do we just have more disinformation, more fake news, or are they radically different?
No, I think that in a way the types and ways how disinformation spreads are basically the same always. So they build on existing conspiracy theories about, for example, the claims about U.S. biological weapon laboratories is an old conspiracy theory trope that is circulating and then surfacing in a certain moment when it's useful for the one who seeks to disinform. So I would not say that these are completely new types or like much more sophisticated types of fakes, but clearly there are issues that make these old techniques and old methods much more impactful than before. When there is also at the same time the development of possible vaccination happening, and clearly disinformers are using anti-vaccination messages very widely.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to ask you a question which is hidden in our topic of discussion. Who is winning the global disinformation war, and what actually a win would mean? What does it mean for the countries and other entities that are spreading the disinformation? And what does it mean for the countries and entities that are fighting against it?
Well, I would divide my answer to this question into two parts. So part of this battle of narratives has also been Russia's and China's promotion of the authoritarian model and its efficiency in fighting COVID-19, presenting that model as a superior to democracies. So in the end, I think that is what is at stake here. And on the other hand, I think that there is very clear understanding that only through that a democratic society is much more strong and much more well equipped to tackle this kind of crisis than an authoritarian model. And only through international cooperation it's possible to win this battle. And then when it comes to like more specific examples of who is winning and how and where, one part of foreign countries like Russia's and China's communication campaigns has been more traditional propaganda of their support also to EU countries like, for example, Italy, and at the same time attacking the European solidarity and creating more divisions, also with a certain disinformation elements, like that the EU would not have done anything in Italy, which is clearly untrue. And here you could see that in the beginning, for example, in the countries where Stratcom works to improve EU's own communication to show the benefits of cooperation with the EU in the Eastern Partnership, meaning Ukraine, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Moldova. So in some countries like early surveys this spring showed that China had been very efficiently sending its message about the assistance that China gives, and the figures showed how people were widely believing that China is one of the major donors. And then through this efficient EU communication, now the figures have flipped, and the audiences again understand where the actual support comes when the EU is the biggest supporter and giving assistance to this region. So I think that definitely there is hope, and we should not give up to the idea that now disinformation is so widespread that we are losing this battle.
I wanted to ask you one more thing, because I believe that we have a tendency to focus on external threats in terms of disinformation, but what about internal threats? Maybe this is a smaller problem in Europe, but if you take a look at the United States, then I'm going to quote CNN, which has counted that between January 27th and May 3rd, Donald Trump made 654 false statements, out of which 215 were directly linked to the pandemic. So how do you fight the threats within?
Yes, that is a very good question. And the easy answer to that from my side, of course, is that we have the mandate from the EU member states, from the European Council, to tackle foreign disinformation, especially Russia's disinformation. But the more, like the wider answer to this is that there can be also different ways to tackle disinformation, and not every part of the answer has to come from governments or institutions like the EU. So the civil society, the journalists, as you, fact checkers, these can be also playing crucial role in tackling domestic disinformation.
Mm-hmm. We're going to go to questions from the audience right now. I invite all the viewers to ask more questions, but for now I'm going to ask you a question from Anna Kędziorek, who asks, have the EU institutions thought about the appropriate program of delivering information about the EU in the European countries? Maybe there should be some programs of educational matter for the journalists. In Poland, I have a feeling that journalists also don't understand the insights.
Well, surely there is more need, like the need to do more, but in general, I think that the European Commission's representation in each of the EU member states is the best place to start with, familiarizing yourself with the European Union, and the representations are doing a lot of work to make this happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would like to ask you about the most efficient European response to external disinformation. What do you believe are the most efficient ways of combating fake news?
I think that there is no silver bullet to fight disinformation. I think that we have to have all the different elements in place at the same time so that they work well together. We have to have a clear political support mandate to do this job, as we have with Russia. We have to have the ability to expose disinformation publicly, so that there is a clear statement and a digital trace when that counters these claims. We also need to strengthen the media literacy programs at schools. We need to have more resources to journalism, quality journalists, which is even more crucial now after COVID-19 or during COVID-19 crisis, when so many media are suffering seriously. Also due to the financial side of the crisis. We need to have the fact checkers doing their part, and we clearly need to have the social media companies fully on board with this, so that abusing them to spread disinformation, or to foreign actors to abuse them to distort the public debate in the EU could be eventually prevented.
Thank you. I'm told that Piotr Świtalski from the Warsaw Bureau of the European Commission has joined us to tell us briefly about what the representation, what the office has done to fight disinformation. Good afternoon, Piotr. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I will be speaking English just to continue from my predecessor. I am Polish. I can speak Polish, but I will speak English. Anyway, great question that Anna Kędziorek asked, and that was partially already answered. Yes, the European Commission representations in the member states have the mandate to inform about the actions of the EU. However, one must remember that the main responsibility on the information policy about the European Union, its benefits of the membership, lie within the member states. But to answer Ms. Kędziorek's question, yes, we do have contacts with the press. We organize seminars. We are here available at any time to answer their questions and deliver information. But to be more specific, during the pandemic, we've seen, just like in Italy or Spain or France or outside of the EU, in the remit where the Stratcom Taskforce has their mandate, so in the eastern neighborhood, we've seen an unprecedented scale of disinformation, of fake information about the European Union, or about the lack of action from the European Union. And what has happened, just to give you some inside knowledge and some information, the Director General for Communication, DG Com, which is directly under President von der Leyen, has created informal task forces that were partially based, or part of the teams of the task forces were based inside the DGCOM in Brussels, and part of the teams were based in the representation. So there was a task force for Italy created, there was a task force for Poland created, there was a task force created for German-speaking countries, a task force for Spain, for Czech and Slovakia. They joined on this project together after splitting in the 90s. But these task forces proved very, very crucial in fighting rapidly spreading disinformation, or rather answering questions that could lead to false beliefs, claims, and we were able, through this task force, which consisted of members both in the headquarters and on the ground, to quickly access information on, be it on health issues, on equipment issues, on blockages of shipments within the internal market. So these task forces quickly responded with crucial information. Perfect example was that we could create very quickly simple but engaging infographics on what is true and what is false when it comes to EU and the fight against the virus. So the claim that the EU has failed or is acting slowly was one of the main misinformations presented by various actors, internal actors, I mean, by providing clear and very simple infographics, we were able to hopefully countermeasure this misinformation. So just a short intervention from the Warsaw office and what is being done to fight disinformation on the EU in the member states in Poland.
Thank you very much, Piotr. So let's get back to Anneli Ahonen. I wanted to ask you one final question as the head of East Stratcom Task Force. Does the EU need to strengthen its soft power to help fight disinformation? Say, do we need a global Stratcom Task Force, or maybe something like Russia Today, but European?
That's a very good question. I think that there has actually been this discussion in the past if the EU should have sort of its own centralized broadcast TV channel to better deliver the messages. And this idea never really went through, and I personally, I am actually quite glad that it didn't happen, because I think that the most efficient way for the EU to tackle this issue is to make sure that there is a clear, wider framework to understand the security aspect of the disinformation challenge, how it's used within within hybrid operations, and then on the other hand to separate the issues of misinformation, misleading information, where media literacy is the best tool to tackle it. And there, this one centralized TV channel that would deliver EU messages, I don't think it really fits the actual challenge that we are facing. So the solution has to be comprehensive, but it has to be also very local, so that the EU improves its own communication, fact-based communication, delivers its the messages efficiently within the local circumstances.
And that was Anneli Ahonen. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.